And here today is our speaker, Reverend Dr. Larry D. Rusha.
Thank you. Good morning. It's dry today. Or is it me? I've always been kind of dry. I have a dry wit. That's what they told me when I was a kid. I had no idea what that meant. So today we're talking about the self. When we were doing the ceremony, one of the things we said is, I love myself. So the question here is, what's the self? What is the self? Now, given that I love science, I played a little bit in looking up some of my old research and some of the people that I've followed for probably 20 years. And it's interesting what they've come up with in terms of neuroscience. It's impressive what they can do in terms of mapping the brain, but not only mapping the brain, but using functional MRI to look exactly at what's going on in terms of the electrical fields in the brain. And they've been able to map neural networks, meaning the nerves that compile a network. They've been able to map that to see how memories are moved around and what takes place. I thought it fascinating that one of the mystics that I follow said that after enlightenment, all of his memories changed. All of his memories changed. And he realized all the dots that connected to the moment he was at. That's what we need to know about our life. Each thing that's going on in our life is a dot that connects to another dot that connects to another dot. And we don't have the ability to look back and kind of connect all the dots together. Stephen Jobs, look him up on YouTube, did a talk to, I think it was the graduating class at Stanford, and he talked about connecting the dots. It's a great talk. So Anil Seth, who was a neuroscientist in England, he said that this idea of the ego is made up of a number of things. First of all, it's made up of the bodily self, having a sense of our body. When we wake up in the morning, after a fraction of a second or so, we're back into our body. Anil had 3 death experiences. And in one of them, he said it was because they had given him the anesthetic and it moved into his brain. And so he said it was really unusual because when he woke up from that, it was different from waking up from his near death. The anesthetic caused him to not know whether he had been in this state for 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years. He had no sense of time. And he said, whereas when you sleep and you wake up in the morning, you still have a sense of time. You have a sense of continuity. But in that case, there wasn't any. And he said that made him even more curious as to what's going on. So he says we have a bodily sense. We have a sense of being the body or being in the body. Secondly, we have a perceptual experience, a perspective which is first person, from me looking out at the world. That's part of the self. And then the volitional self is that part which is choosing or intending to do or cause an effect in the world. That's also part of our self. Now, one of the things to recognize is that this self that we're talking about with a small s, that self is the mind. That self is the ego structure. And so all of these different points, whether it's bodily self, perceptual self, volitional self, the next two, this one I love because I do this all the time, the narrational self, narrating your life. Like right now, there's something talking to me about, can you pronounce that word differently? Maybe you could say it this way. Yeah, so I have arguments constantly. And then there's the social self. And that kind of interacts with that narrational self. And the social self is all about these experiences we have with other people. And we're always the center of those experiences. True? Yeah. It would be hard to be outside of yourself and be in an interactive situation with somebody else. But this is also something I want to talk about later on in the talk, because that's exactly where we're going to get to at some point. So the body self, the perceptual self, the volitional self, the narration self, and social self. And then we have the biological self. The biological self is made up of, and I always love this, is people are so afraid of viruses. So afraid of viruses. And yet, our body is composed of many different kinds of viruses. It's got many different kinds of bacteria. We're actually a community, because there's lots of living organisms inside of this shell. Yeah? It's true. And then we can go from there to the cellular level with millions of cells, and from there to the molecular level, and from there to the atomic level, until we find nothing at all, which you are mostly nothing at all. If you look at the universe and the distance between stars, it's huge, huge. Well, the same thing is true in the atomic structure, and the same thing is true in the molecular structure. There's lots of distance between them. So if our body is a community of other organisms, and it's a structure, and we believe then that the skin is the boundary, then we have an internal part of our awareness which is only focused on internal structures when something's wrong. Otherwise, it doesn't pay that much attention to it. And then we have an awareness outside of us, in the outer world, objects outside. That awareness seems to be completely different from me. That's what gives us a sense that you and I are different, the separate self, which is another way of saying the ego. So the separate self says, because my boundary stops here, everything else is separate from me. Babies don't have that. The Aboriginals 25,000 years ago never looked at life that way. Even the Hopi Indians talk about grandmother spider woman spun her web of the universe, and everything is connected. As you know, when you touch a spider web, everything moves. Prior to that, we don't know how far back this goes, the story of Indira's in the Hindu tradition, Indira's jewels. And the jewels were water droplets all connected together, all with a reflection of the others. And that's the universe. That whole story has gotten lost, along with all of the other, what we call creation myths. And we have lost touch with the fact that we're all connected. That we're all connected to each other. And this idea that we have a separate self is actually nonsense. It's nonsense. So you have what you think is a body, which this body is different from other people's bodies. Well, we now know from, I think it's Donald Hoffman, who's another one of the neuroscience and biologists. He says you're living in a hallucination. Because, for example, your eyes. Seems like that's an easy one to take. So your eyes are like cameras. Yes and no. Yes, we have a lens. Yes, we have a retina. And this external world comes into the retina and it charges these photoelectric bits, maybe like pixels. Have you heard this pixel? What's a pixel? Yeah? Like every camera's got a certain number of pixels. Well, your camera in your eye has 130 million pixels. The best known camera has got about, of common cameras, is about 21,000 pixels. So we then take that information and it translates into an electrical signal, and that signal goes into the back of your brain to the optical part of the brain, and it takes that information and compares it to the other information you have in your brain. And it says, this must be the world, and then it projects that to the frontal lobe and projects that into your vision. You're not actually seeing the world. You're seeing a construct that the brain puts together that predicts what you're looking at. Does that change your perspective a little bit? Yeah, because we believe we see the world exactly the way it is, and actually we don't see the world exactly the way it is. We see it according to, and this is the thing that's becoming more and more pronounced within the world of neuroscience, is that our brain is actually a predictive instrument. It's designed around predicting what's going to take place. It's designed around predicting something different from what is, or what's normal, or what's comfortable. Of course, that all relates back to the evolution from the beginning of time for human beings, because it's all about survival. We've never, even though we've gotten to the point to where we're in the most highly technological society in the world, we've never gotten to the point to where we've let that part of the brain go. And part of the reason, as David Bohm, the great physicist, who I love dearly, said, he said, it's a problem because what's happened is we're fragmenting more and more and more. He said that in 1990. We're fragmenting more and more. He actually used that in some of his theoretical physics work that he did in the 50s. He was considered Einstein's spiritual son. And conflict comes out when you challenge what's normal. He challenged what was normal. And what happened was he ended up coming before the Congress and the Committee on Un-American Activities. They charged him with being a communist and expelled him from the country and took away his passport. He went to Brazil, and from Brazil he went to London, to the university in London, and there worked on some of the most amazing theoretical parts that you can ever imagine. And the big thing he said was, we have separated science from spirituality. And it's like separating twins, and they don't know who they are. And science is doing its own thing, and spirituality is doing its own thing, and yet they both come from the same nut. That tree has branches. He was powerful in what he did, and he actually challenged the establishment of the sciences, even up to this day, in terms of quantum science and Einstein's theory of relativity. He challenged all of that. And what he said was, he became friends with J. Krishnamurti, and they used to have these amazing conversations. And the conversation at one point came to, what is the self? And Krishnamurti said, it's nothing. Meaning, it's no thing. It's no thing. And actually, when you get into the traditions of Ramana Maharshi and others in non-duality, it is no thing. The self is this construct that we talked about. But the self, if you ask, who am I? And you sit with that question, it will not get answered. It can't be answered because there isn't an answer to it. The self you believe you are, you aren't. That's just your psychological, physiological structures. The self that you are is beyond that, and that's the capital S. So we talked about the lower case S. The self with a large case, and I have to say that there's a lot of magical thinking when it comes to new thought. And we have to be careful with that kind of thing. And we have terminology which confuses people too, like, well, I'm the higher self. Okay, well, most people won't know what that means. They still think they're the body self. But there is this higher self, but this higher self is not individualized. Actually, it's consciousness itself. It's awareness itself. So awareness, and here's the confusion when it comes to consciousness. Consciousness is also called, what the universe is all consciousness. Yes, but at a level of understanding that takes more to understand than we know right now. But consciousness, we also say, is my awareness. I'm aware. When we go to sleep, we think we lose consciousness. We don't actually lose consciousness. We dream, and we're aware of the dream, yes? And then we move into delta sleep. When we move into delta sleep, we have never realized that we're aware, but we're aware of silence. We're aware of no visualization, because there's no visualization there. There's no sound there, and therefore we're aware of silence. But that's why we have this continuity, the continuity through sleep to our daily life. So this higher self is awareness. We're aware, and as we're aware, we begin to realize that we don't have an individual version of awareness. It's like saying that dogs and cats are conscious, and atoms are conscious, and molecules are conscious, and the universe is conscious. That would say that there are billions of different consciousnesses. True? Which is wrong. There's only one consciousness, and it's experiencing through you and you and you and you and you, and that's how we are all connected. That's the oneness that connects us all. That consciousness is the consciousness of one. There's only one consciousness. That awareness is aware of your experiences. It's the knower of your experiences. The mind is not. We get confused that we think the mind is the knower of our experiences. In fact, most of us only experience the labels of our experience. We experience a name, and from the point at which we're used to using the name of a person, we now experience the name, which we have a construct of who that person is, and it stays with us. And yet, nobody's ever the same, right? Our cells are changing all the time, our personality is changing all the time, our experiences are changing all the time, everything is changing all the time, and we're never the same. And yet, every time we look in the mirror, we look the same. We think, oh, wow, well, I just go, oh, geez, how'd I get this old? But that's the body. That's because we're so identified with the body. And what it does is this. The sense of separation causes the greatest catastrophe the world has ever known, because we break down into more and more and more fragments. You and I are different, you and I are different, you and I are different. My religion is different from your religion, my politics is different from your politics, my this, my that, my other. Pretty soon, we're in conflict with each other. And from the earliest human beings, everybody worked together. Everybody thought in similar ways. They had similar experiences. And when the fragmentation began, it started this whole process of the world becoming more fragmented. Now, in mathematics, there's fractals, and fractals are these little parts that represent or look similar to the mother that it came from. For example, here's an interesting story. If I go to Stinson Beach in San Francisco and I grab some sand and I take some of that sand and put a little bit of it under a microscope and zoom in on it and look at it, it has the same outline as the coastline. Interesting, huh? That's called a fractal. And if you take that crystal and cut that crystal, that silicon, and then you look at the part that you just cut, now it has the same coastline as the other one, and the other one, and the other one. Those are fractals. Those are the patterns we see repeating themselves. So here's what we need to know. That's a lot of information that I just gave you. All of it's designed to help your mind get muttered up. Yeah, worked, didn't it? It's a great technique. The moment that I can get you to get confused, you're going to drop your sense of what's being said and try to listen inside. You want to be able to listen to that which is beyond what's going on in the mind's chatter. That's called intuition. Intuition comes directly from the highest part of what consciousness is to directly into the experience. When I had my death experience, one of the things that came out of it was I had a real high sense of intuition. Right after I had the death experience, it took me a couple months before I could actually get out and experience again what it was like to be out in society. And I went to I think it was like a Target or a Walmart, and I was overwhelmed with all of the people and the things in the store and the energies of all that, and the fact that I was getting all these voices from all the people that were around me. Everything was coming in all at the same time. I ran out, panicked, and I went and sat in the car for a while. So the experience of the death caused all the filters that I'd put together in the mind over time to go away. But everything comes into us all the time. We just take parses of that. 400 million bits of information come into us all the time. We process 400,000 of it. So you're really narrowing everything down, right? Now it's time to start widening out so that you understand that you are the consciousness that created everything. You are the consciousness that created you and you and you and you. Everything is created by consciousness. It is the creator. And it creates without separation. But once we come into the plane that we're at, which is the lowest plane, in the Hindu structure there are many planes. This is the lowest, meaning the grossest form of energy. And at this plane, this is where all the separation takes place. And at this point, the learning process is to learn who you really are. Because when you learn who you really are, you graduate from school and you go to the next level. And if you really get that idea of creator, then you realize the highest level and you skip all of the intermediate levels. So it's worthwhile spending some time asking the question, who am I? And listening. Wait. We can get nervous doing that, but just keep waiting. The answer will come, but it won't come in the form of words. It'll come in a form that will surprise you. And when that happens, then the infinite becomes you. Take a breath. You are the power and presence of the infinite, experiencing right here and right now. Who is forgotten, you are the power and the presence of the infinite, experiencing right now. And right now is an eternity. Stay in the right now, experiencing as the Creator's creation, and all of them tied together, and life will change in ways you never imagined. Namaste.